This video is going to go update to the DU item type sync app. So before we get into the app, I want to recap where we are at with drainage. So in previous versions of OpenRose Designer, we've ran into a specific issue around annotation. And basically, if we tried to annotate off an item type, it would only work if the item type was attached to that specific view. Right? So that means if you had a conduit, when you open the profile view, you had to attach an item type instance directly to the profile view. And then you had to attach another instance directly to, say, the plane view or the cross-section view. And all those were separate item type instances that you had to fill out the properties for each one. And so that really wasn't a great workflow, but that was kind of what we were stuck with the software. But now that software ORD has finally addressed that issue, and so we can utilize what's referred to as a single source of truth item types. So that means that there's just one item type attached to that feature, and you can see that item type no matter what view you are in. So there's no need to have those multiple instances across all the views. So it makes it a lot easier. So we had the DU sync app in the previous versions would go and make sure that it would keep all of these view instances up to date and in sync with each other, so all those properties would be the same no matter what view you were in. So moving forward, we won't need that functionality of it anymore, but we still need some other functionality that I'll go over here in a second. So I wanted to recap that issue. The other thing I want to remind people of is that the properties themselves are static. So the item type properties, I could have had them be like formulas and go and read the hydraulic properties directly, and then they would update dynamically. So if you changed like the length of a pipe, the item type property for length would automatically update. And you might be wondering why we aren't doing that. And mainly because when I set that up, it really slowed the file down a lot. So I decided not to do that, and instead I have this sync app that would just go and pull the properties whenever you hit the button to update. And that way we don't get the slowdown, but then you still have the ability to go read those hydraulic properties directly and not have to type in a length or anything like that. So the other reason you might ask, or a question you might ask yourself, is why don't we just use the hydraulic properties directly rather than the item type properties? And we had also tried that originally, but ran into several issues of those hydraulic properties not being available across the reference. And so Bentley's tried over several releases to address that problem, and they've somewhat fixed it, but there's still cases where those properties still wouldn't be available. And so it's just not reliable or consistent. So we didn't want to keep entertaining that route and run into more problems. So the item types is the path forward that we know is going to work. But now you kind of get a little bit of background and understanding of why they're static and not dynamic. Alright, so let's take a look at what we're going to do moving forward. Since we can now make use of the single source of truth item types on drainage features, we no longer have to worry about having item types individually attached to each individual view, or making sure that all those property values are the same across all the views. So it's going to get a lot easier because now we can just utilize one single source truth item types for that given feature. So in order for us to make use of this, the DU sync app has been updated. So it's going to actually be able to handle utilizing the single source truth item types over the view specific instances of the item types. So that's what we're going to show next here is this updated app. But I do want to make a quick note on if we're going to take an old file from maybe 1012 and move it into 2024 and switch to start using the single source of truth item types. There were some minor setbacks, specifically around some of the annotation. So for the most part, it doesn't break anything, but there are a couple situations where it did break some of the annotation. So I'll go over that later on in the video, but let's take a look at the update to the drainage app, the DU sync app. So I'm over in OpenRose Designer 2024. I'm going to launch our DU item type sync app here. And you'll notice that it looks vastly different from the previous version. So I have a screenshot of what the old version looked like. So you see it's very different. I do want to mention that this app, if you're loading it in 10.12, it will still load this old version of it because obviously in that version we still have the problems that I just mentioned. So you don't want the new functionality if you're still running the older version already. So it's going to handle that automatically. So first thing you're going to notice is that it's actually going to list all of the change items that it found in the active file. And you can always check the log at the bottom. It kind of gives you some information on what it did during the loading event. So it found the alignments, found the item type library, found your link features, your node features. And then this last one, it's really just looking at all of the item type instances that it found, particularly to drainage utility item types, and making sure that they are attached to an actual drainage utility feature. So if there was maybe just a migration line drawn and you attached the item type directly to that line, then it would show up here and saying, hey, uh, I found an instance of the item type that's not attached to an actual drainage feature. So I'm not really going to be able to work with that instance because it can't pull drainage properties from a drainage feature because there's no drainage feature. So we don't really want those instances hanging around because they really shouldn't be there. So that's all this little check is doing on open or on load. It'll kind of check to make sure there's none of those hanging around. If there are, you probably want to get rid of them. Okay. So first thing, there are different ways to view the data. So there's a table view, which shows this table view. And then there's two different modes. You can do everything. You can show just the conduit network. So it's going to show you conduit and nodes that are connected to conduits. Or you can switch it to a gutter mode, which is going to show you all the gutters and the nodes that are attached to the gutter. That's where this link type column comes into play. You can see it'll tell you if it's a gutter or conduit. And then you can also switch the view over to a hierarchy view. And so what that's going to do is kind of show you more of what nodes are connected to what links. And you can also see the flow direction. And this as well can switch between a conduit view or a gutter view. So it might just help you see the data a little better that way. So let's go over some general buttons. So first, there's a refresh all. So it does exactly what you think it does. It basically will refresh all the data in the active file. So I'll go and look, see if there's any new links placed or something or removed, and it will update all the data, item type data it finds. That's what the refresh all button does. It just goes out and makes sure that the data displayed is the same as in the active file. I should mention that you can also refresh on an individual basis. So if you only want to refresh a particular drainage feature, that's what this little refresh button is for each individual line item. I do want to mention that all the functionality from the table view is also in the hierarchy view. You just have to right click. So if I right click, I'm going to get all the same information. So all those columns, data is going to be listed more in the right click menu, and all those button update options or actions will be listed at the top. So no matter what view you're in, you still can get to all of the functionality. So moving on, update all is going to go through and update all of the drainage features listed in this app that it found. And so what does update all mean? It'll make more sense here as I go through all of it, but that basically means it's going to update all of the item type properties, right? So I mentioned earlier that the properties are static, and we need to, basically pull that data from the hydraulic properties. So like the length, the size, the inverts, all those like calculated properties. It needs to go and pull from the hydraulic properties and set those values on these item type properties. And so that's what that update all is going to do. It's going to do it for all of them. And you also can do that individually just by using this update button. It'll individually update that given feature. So the next buttons are more of just like quick fix buttons. So the attach all missing SSOT stands for single source of truth, drainage and utility item types. So this would be if you had a file that you started maybe in 1012, and when it brings forward, maybe it has all of the view instances, right? But then it doesn't actually have the single source of truth instance of the item type. And so that will go ahead and attach any missing single source of truth item types. And so there's a column right here. It says has SSOT DUIT. That's going to indicate which features have or don't have that single source of truth item type attached. So in my case, they all do. So this button really isn't going to do anything. Right. So you can easily see which of your features might be missing that, and you can use this to attach it. Now, if one was missing it, there would be an attach button directly in this column for that given drainage item. So you can do it on an individual basis, or you can do it in bulk from the button up here. So I just want to mention that. The other button next to it is to detach all those extra view instances, right? So the ones we don't care about anymore. This will go through and remove all those extra instances. And so if I move this over a little bit, we can see there's a column here. It says the number of view DU item type instances, right? So it will tell you actually the number of those extra instances that it found per item and list them here. So I see all 0, so this data set is good. Later on I'll open up one from 1012 so we can see this if you take something from older version forward and see how it works. But just like the single source of truth, the attach button that would show up if what was missing here, if there are found view instances that we need to get rid of, there also would be a button here to get rid of them individually. So again, you could do it in bulk or individually as you wish. Yeah. So those are more of just two buttons to really there to take an older file and bring it up to this version and get rid of the extra item type instances that we want to never have to deal with ever again. Right. The next two are more for information. So you can output your alignment names just to the log. So if you wanted to see all the alignments that it found, you can go ahead and do that, and it'll just output it as more of just information. Right. So it needs to be able to find those item type or these alignments in order to calculate the station and offset for a given node. So that's why that you might be wondering why is that even there. It needs to be able to find those in order to calculate the station. And then this last info button is just to view all the item type library information. So you typically probably won't even need to look at this. This will open up another dialog here, and it's going to give you all the information about all the properties and how everything's working. So we can see we have 3 different item types. They have default properties set up. They have calculated properties set up. So this is basically saying how to calculate a given property, how to find that value from a drainage hydraulic property or something else. I'll go over the overwrites in a little bit. It's a new functionality of the software. And then there's also the ability to update a UDX property. So those are custom hydraulic properties. And so this is saying that these two have UDX properties set up. If I click on a given one, then I can see all the extra information. So again, I'm not going to go into that right now, but we can see for each property what type it is. So is it a calculated property? Meaning, am I going to go and pull that from some hydraulic property? Is it overwritable? So I added a new functionality to overwrite the value. Right, so sometimes there's just problems and maybe it's a rounding issue or something, and you just need to overwrite the calculated value to be something else. So for some of these properties, you have that functionality now. It's come up a couple times, so when I was doing the update, I figured I would give the ability to handle those situations. There's other types here, so there's a default type, meaning it's not really a calculated property. I can't pull that from anywhere. So like type would be a good example. Like, is it a type A, is it a type B? So we have defaulted those. So for a given feature definition, we have the default value defined. And so it's can go and get that default value. If for some reason you changed it, you have the ability to go and retrieve that default value again. And so that's what that's setting up, is just saying, hey, go get the default value. Then the other type would be like read-only. So those would be properties that have like a formula defined for it. So there's no changing it. Or maybe it's just a property that was set to read-only. And then the last thing is there's just no calculation type. So for CFN, that is an example of something that we can't pull from anywhere else. We can't default. That's going to be something that you'll have to fill out because there's no way to grab that value from anywhere. So you scroll over a little bit, you can see which ones have an equivalent UDX property, right? So for type, there's item type property, but there's also a UDX property that it will also update. So that's what that's doing there. So I won't go into too much more detail. It's probably more than needed, but just giving you some information of what the app's using. Okay. So now let's go over the actual feature area where it's listing all of the drainage features. So I kind of went over some of them, so like the refresh and the update. Let's go over these other two buttons. Here is a zoom and fit and a select. So if I move this kind of out of the way, let me maybe zoom over a little bit or pan over a little bit, and let's click on one at random and say, hey, I want to fit my view to that. So it's going to basically zoom and pan me over into that. So I can see where that is. The other button will be a select button. So if you just want to select it, it'll go through and select that. So now you can look at the properties. You can see there's some item types attached. So just a little bit of added functionality, just usability wise. So we already went over the type, so it's going to tell you if it's a link or node. I guess we went over link type, not type. So the type is going to tell you if it's a link or if it's a node feature. And then the link type is going to tell you if it's a conduit or a gutter. Right, so if we switch to all, you can see there's the gutter type. The name is going to be that feature name of that feature, right? So for this one that I just selected, its name is D-2, right? Now the feature definition name is also listed, so you can see what feature definition is set on that feature. You can also see the item type name. So for conduit, you should expect to see the conduit item type, right? So the has updates, this will let you know if there are updates to that given feature. So the update all or the update buttons, if this is false, that means that there are things that will get updated when you hit those buttons. So it's a little quick indicator to let you know if all your data is up to date or not. Pretty nice. All right, so it preloads all that information, so you know what's maybe out of date, and you can just say, hey, this one's out of date. Let me just update that one rather than updating everything again. And same thing goes for Has UDX updates. So those ones are going to let you know if the UDX properties for that feature are out of date or not. So these are all true, meaning that there are updates to those. So when you hit this update, it's going to make some change to those UDX properties to bring it up to where the current value should be. So we already went over has a single source. Now this one we haven't gone over is does it have feature definition defaults, right? So I mentioned back in this info view about having defaults. So let me clarify a little bit more in that, right? So this item type is going to be used for all the different conduit feature definitions, right? So if it is a default value, then it needs to go and pull that default value for the specific feature definition set for that specific feature. So what it will do is it will look at all of the feature definitions in use for the active file. So in this case, I have all of these feature definitions in use in this file. And it's telling me, this feature definition has a default value of type A, whereas this feature definition has a default value of type B. So you can see that information at a feature definition level, right? So that's how the default values are working. So if a feature definition does not have a default value, then it'll tell you, hey, whatever feature definition you're using, the defaults weren't set up. The app couldn't find the default value, so it kind of gives you an indicator that, hey, I can't go and get a default value because there are none. All right, so example that would be like gutters. We don't really have default values for gutters. So the gutters are there more for the hierarchy view of just looking at that, because we don't really have item types. We're not really annotating off the gutters. So they're in there, and there's some future possibility for functionality that might need the gutters for the calculation side of things. So while I was writing, I might as well include it now, save myself some time later. So you might be wondering why that's there. So for right now, it's more of just view, not really updating any properties or anything on those types. Okay, we already went over the view instances, so now there are 2 more columns here just to let you know if there might have been an issue. So if there are feature definition issues, so if there's a problem with the feature definition, like I can't get the default values, or there's no item type attached to the feature definition at all, so it won't even know what item type it's supposed to be attached to this feature. Now the way we have it set up in ODAP, you really shouldn't run into that issue. So hopefully you're not seeing this outside of the gutter types. And the last one would be single source of truth item type issues. So mainly this will be around if there's no single source of truth item type attached, then it won't be able to actually update anything. So it's just a further warning saying, hey, you got an issue going on with that. So the 2 that we have issues with are the gutters and a dummy node, which a dummy node isn't really meant to be annotated or used off of. It's just almost like a placeholder. So it makes sense that I'm seeing issues for those 2. But it's good that I'm not seeing it for anything else. All right. So moving on to the last area of this app would be the actual showing you of properties when you select on a given feature. So when I select on a given feature, I'm going to see all of the properties. And so I have the ability to go and refresh an individual property with this refresh button, right? So just like I can refresh in bulk or refresh an entire feature, I can also refresh just as given specific property. Yep. So it's going to tell you the current value here. So you can tell I haven't run this yet because they're all pretty much zeros. It's going to tell you what type of value it is. So is it a number? Is it true, false? Is it text? A little indicator of that. It's going to tell you that calc type. So I mentioned over in the info area, you could see what calculation type a given property is on the item type library itself. But now it also is going to show you here at the individual property. So it's telling me that this node to node length is a calculated property, and here is the calculated value, right? So if it's a default value, it's going to give me what the default value is, right? So for this, here's that type, the default, it's a default type, here's the default value. If that property has an equivalent UDX property, then you'll see a little box here, and it'll give you the current UDX value. All right, so since I haven't ran it yet, you see that it's not populated yet. So ideally, you would see this would match, this value. And then again, we have a has updates, right? So over here we have a has update. So this is telling me that there's something that needs to be updated or that is out of date for this given feature. And now over here, it'll actually tell you which specific property has an update. All right, so this one doesn't have an update because the value is false and the current value is false, right? Um, but this one, the current value is 0, and it should be 48.69. Right? And then the last column is there a UDX update? So does the UDX property match the item type property? I skipped over one column here, and that is the overwrite. So if a column or a property is deemed to have the ability to be able to overwrite that value, you can check that on, and it will let you then type in a value rather than use the calculated or default value. So again, use that sparingly, but it does come up from time to time. I've had a couple people reach out about it in the past, and there were some workarounds I gave. This kind of answers that problem. I think around the head walls if you're trying to use like the type for the head wall, we really just have a generic head wall, so there's not really a default value because there's so many different types, and we just have one generic one. So that would be an example of one where you might need to override the type to key in the value. Okay, so I'm going to leave all my overrides off for now, but I can hit the apply button, and that's going to do the same thing as this update button, right? Now the difference here is the apply button. I have the opportunity to overwrite things like that, but if you don't really care to get into that and you just want to bulk update everything, that's update and update all are a little bit more easier buttons, right? But you get more control and functionality when you get over into this section. So I'm going to just hit update on this specific one, and we can watch all the values update. And as the whole time you're using the app, it will be updating the log section at the bottom, right? So if I scroll down, and if you have it collapsed, it'll tell you too. It goes green, or if something goes wrong, it'll go red. But successfully updated the single source truth item type properties on feature named, and then you can see log for details. So if I expand that, you can see everything that it did. So let's take a quick look at that. So it's saying, hey, I updated this property. Previous value was 0. New value is this value. And now it's matching the calc value, right? So if it was overridden, it would tell you, hey, I'm overriding the calc value. So if nothing was done, it says, hey, it's pretty much already set to false, so there's nothing to update, right? So a lot of detail, you know exactly what it's doing. There should be no question of what it's doing. I made sure that to really take time and make sure that the end user could understand and see everything that's happening. So let's do one more thing here. Let's come up here and say, maybe, I really need this to be 70. So I can come here, and also I forgot to mention that, hey, if you try to enter a value that's not allowed, it's going to go red and let you know, hey, can't have that as a value. If you hover over it, it'll give you a little tooltip. So I'm going to check that on. I'm going to hit apply. And we'll do that again, and then we'll take a quick look at that. So now we should see right here, it's telling me it was overwrited from this value. And now if I come here and maybe I just hit a refresh all, show you that information will be retained. Which one was I on? There you go. So you can see that it retained that overwrite information for that particular feature. All right. So one thing to note is when you overwrite a value, you just need to be careful if you move that value or change that conduit and the length drastically changes. You need to watch out for that. And lastly, let's just not forget that we still have this other way to view the data, the hierarchy view, and it works relatively the same way. You can select the different things, and the properties will be listed for the given selection, as well as there is a right-click menu to see more of that column data that was in the table view if you needed to, or if you wanted to zoom to or select or update that given one or refresh that given one. So all the same stuff that was in the table view, you can also get in this hierarchy view. So another thing I didn't mention here is for these calculated types of properties, if you take a look, it's basically going to tell you what property it's pulling from, what hydraulic property it's pulling from, but it's also going to tell you what unit it's going to output that in, and if there is any rounding specified, tell you what the rounding, so the number of digits that might go to. So there are a couple different types of calculated. So this one's a property pull, so it's going to pull a property. But like conduit size is another type of calculated, where it's going to basically go look up a property to get what shape it is, and then if it's that shape, then it knows what format to return it in. So you can see, if it's a conduit shape 2, 3, 5, 10. So those are all like circular, ellipse, box. It's going to change what the output would be. So, this one's going to get, for a circular pipe, it's going to give you the diameter. But then for other types, it's going to give you the rise, and then it can even add a suffix. So if it wants the unit, like inches added, it can define that. There's an X, so it's going to give you like rise X run, like we typically, or span, like we would show it. So those, if you really care to dive into all of it, it's all listed here for the different types. Let's see if we see any other ones. So property pulls. So from node IT, so if you want to go, instead of pulling a property from itself, to go pull property from the nodes, this would be for conduit. It's going to have information like what it's going to use to find that node. Is it start node? Is it stop node? And then what item type property is going to go and get, right? And so if we click on the nodes, you'll see there's, from link. So we can go and get link properties from nodes and node properties from links, right? There's several types. I have a document if you guys are interested in those kind of details of all the different calculation types and what they're doing. So.